What I want to talk about today is actually what's happening behind the scenes when you start editing in Dreamweaver. And basically it is, I'm going to be teaching you a tiny little bit about code. I'm not going to be teaching you how to program things by hand. But what I want you to understand is what happens when you add an object, what it looks like, and most importantly, if something goes wrong, sometimes you can go into the code and you can actually recognize what's happening, and the fix is really simple. And then you don't have to wait for me. You can take care of it yourself, which is number one, a good thing. But also, I think it's really smart that you understand at least a little bit about what's happening when you build a web page. Even if you can't do it by typing it out by hand, at least understand what's going on. There's a couple of things that you can do in Dreamweaver, and some of you have seen me do this. Right up here in the top left-hand corner, you can go, you should be set to design, and that's where you see everything the way it should look and all of that. Then the other thing is you can click on code, and that's where you see the web page as it exists in the code. And lastly, you can go to split, which is actually really handy, because then as you change things and highlight things, it changes and highlights over here on the left. And so you can see the effect that one has on the other. So let's just take a look at a couple of things here and just show you a couple of things about the code, how code works in HTML, and just so that you have a sense of what's going on. So if I go and I want to find out something about, let's say, this paragraph or this line here, just gave part of it away. If I go to the code and I look at this line and I zoom in, you'll see that it's highlighted. You'll also see that that line and the lines before it and after it are started with this little P inside the brackets, just like the brackets that you have when you do greater than or less than. Remember that from elementary school? Remember, I told you it's like a shark's mouth, and it always pointed towards the one that's the most. Okay, remember that little trick they teach you? That helped me a lot as a kid. I love that, right? In this case, the P is inside the two mouths, so the mouths face inward. If one of those brackets is backwards, or both those brackets are backwards, the browser isn't going to recognize this as a command. What do you think this command, the P inside the brackets, is for? Paragraph. Very good. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? P for paragraph. Here's what I want you to see, though. Look below it, or at the end of the line. So if I go to the end of this line that I've highlighted, see how it has a /P at the end there? Whenever you start a command in HTML, and you're saying this is a paragraph, one of the things that you have to do is you have to tell the browser when the paragraph ends. That makes sense, right? You have to tell it when the paragraph starts and when the paragraph ends. So the ending command is a /P. So the regular P inside the brackets, that designates this is the beginning of a paragraph. The /P designates the fact that this is the end of a paragraph. Notice what happens when I click on design. If I just go here, you'll see this paragraph is basically what it is. Look at the code. Is there a skipped line between these two lines here? No. Is there a skipped line now? Yes. So that's essentially what the paragraph tag does, is it tells the browser, starting a new paragraph, skip a line, and then start going again. This makes sense to everybody? Okay, it's pretty easy. If we go back up to the top and look at the div tags that we created before, so I click on this div, go to my code, you can see div ID, okay, that's the name that I gave it, in quotes, end bracket. And then you'll see here at the end of this div is a /div. Again, telling the browser this is the end of that div. That's all a div really is. Let's create a div around our text, our gobbledygook text, and watch what happens. So we're going to go to split mode, and we're going to create a div. So go to split here, and I'm going to highlight all my text. You can see now all the text is highlighted. Oh, I didn't get quite all of it. that doesn't matter because that's just an empty space anyway. And now I'm going to insert a div tag. So I'm just going to hit a div tag. And a couple things are going to happen here. I want you to see two things that happen here, and then we'll basically be done. So now I'm going to give this div an ID or a name. We're going to call it content. And then I'm going to click New CSS Rule. Now let me show you what happens if I don't click that. I'm just going to click OK. There, everything's now in a div. And you can see, oh, I did type in content. Well, actually, it still kind of worked what I wanted it to do. So now you can see that right here it says div content ID, and then we have a slash div at the end. So it's saying that all this stuff in here is now contained by the div. But the problem is, if I go over to my CSS stuff over here, and I look, I don't have a content CSS style under here. I can't edit this. That's a problem. So I'm going to undo this. Now I'm going to re-add my div again. Call it content. But this time, I'm going to give it a rule. Click OK. Now you're starting to see this stuff. And now I want you to see, look, already here, all of a sudden, you might see that here in pink, you see this little pound sign content and brackets popping up. Now watch what happens as let's just add, let's just do the box here. So I'm going to say width 700 pixels. That's all for now. Click OK. Click OK. Now drop me down here, but let's scroll back up to the top. Oh, look at that. Content, width 700 pixels. Let's take a look at this under full code mode here and look at what we got. At the top of your website or web page, every web page will have what we call the heading. And it's a little code here, bracket head. And then what this is a few things like title. So whatever the title here is, remember how if you open a web page in the browser, it has a little title across the top? That's where that comes from. You can put that in there. But then here's what I really want you to see. Style, type, text, CSS, right there. And then you can see all the settings that you have for all your divs are right here. And look at this. The one I just created called content, 700 pixels. Whenever you have an ID, a div that's designated by an ID, it's pound and then the name. Notice that when I have a class, like I did the other day with my buttons, it's period and then the name of the divs. So I can do all sorts of things. Let's just let's go to split here. So just take a look at this. Let's save it and preview it. And you can see that my div is rather invisible, but it has a 700 pixel boundary, which hasn't changed a single thing that I've done. Why? Because I haven't told it to go anywhere, and my text isn't longer than 700 pixels. So let's go here and let's say this. Let's give it a background color. Now I can do it by code. So I'm just going to hit return, and then it starts giving me hints here. Okay. So right here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go background. Okay, see, look, it's showing me. I can just double click on that, and then I'm just going to give it a color. And let's just do like a light gray for a color. How about that? Boom. And then I always have to end it with a semicolon. Okay, now, I just typed that in by hand. Notice what happens now if I hit the refresh button here. Now all of a sudden the div that I have all that text in has a color. If I go back and I preview it in Safari, there it is, 700 pixels wide, and now it's standing out. Still looks kind of dumb though. Okay, it's not looking very good. What would you suggest I do? I know what I do first with it. I'm going to center it. How about that? So let's go in here. Now, I don't expect you to go into the code to actually modify these things. I just want you to see what's happening. So if I want to change my content div, I go over here to content, double click on it. I'm going to go to my background here. There, see, there's the code that I typed. What I really want to do is I want to position this thing in the center. So you remember our trick for doing that is making our right and our left margins set to auto. And apply. And now you can see, look at that. It put that in the code right here. Margin right, margin left, auto. Okay? So I click OK, save it, let's go back and preview it, and now you can see that my text box, or my content, is now centered in a 700 pixel box. I still don't like it from a design standpoint because I don't like the fact that my text is just going right up against the border here. I think it should have a little space to breathe, don't you? Okay, so there's a real easy way of taking care of that. Go back in here, double click on content again. We're going to go back to our box and we're going to take our padding and we're going to add 20 pixels of padding. And now you'll see all of a sudden it moves everything over. And what that does is it gives me 20 pixels of like a buffer around the div on the inside of the div. So that's different than margin. Margin gives you area outside the div. Padding gives you area inside the div. So if I save that and I go and preview it, you can see it's starting to look a little bit better. A little bit of a word of warning with padding, by the way. If you take a look at this, width 700 pixels, padding 20. Guess what? How wide is my actual div now? It's not 700 pixels anymore. It is 740. 20 pixels this way, 20 pixels this way, plus the 700 in the middle. So whenever you add padding, you have to realize that now the div is actually getting bigger. It's actually, now that only matters if you're worried about how it matches up with the other stuff. So in this case, it doesn't really matter, visually speaking. But it did actually get bigger because you just made it wider by 20 pixels on both sides. Okay, so that is something to be careful of. But if I show you this, can you see how the code is working here? There's a pattern to it. And this pink up here that's in the heading of the website, that corresponds with the div that's down here that says div ID equals content. If I go and delete this by accident, okay, we're going to lose everything. Save, and now again preview. And you'll notice now we've lost all of our settings for the content. So this is important. Whenever you're setting up a div, it encapsulates what you want in the div with a div tag. So just bracket div space ID equals and then the name. Okay? And then at the end of that content it does /div. But in order to actually start giving it settings like 700 pixels, wide, paddings or margins or whatever, that's what it puts up in the heading of the website. And without both of those two pieces, you've got nothing. And that's very important to understand too. You have to have both in order to do what you want to do usually. Which is why when you add a div, you also have to say add a CSS rule. And that rule is the pink stuff that I just deleted. So if you look in the code, these right here, these pink things, those are the rules. So if I go in and I undo what I just did and take this and put it back, save it, and now we go back and preview again, all my settings are back. You see how that works? All I really want you to understand, I don't want you to go in and type code by hand unless you really want to start doing that. Oh, but so let me give you another real world thing. Let's say by accident you create a div, but some of the text somehow is outside the div. Go ahead and take a look at the code. If you go in and you look, you can see that this text, these paragraphs, are after the /div, which is basically indicating the end of that division, that layer. All you need to do is just drag these up like this and put them inside before the /div. And now everything's back to normal. So sometimes when it does some strange things, if Dreamweaver does something really strange to you, It might help you to go and look at the code and see if you notice anything obvious. You may not notice something obvious. That's fine, then call me over, I'll help you. But I do want you to get a sense of what's actually happening under the hood, so to speak, with Dreamweaver when it's creating a web page. Does this make sense to everybody? Okay then.